By 24 weeks, the vital organs of the fetus are well formed. The primitive heart can beat on its own. The once powerless lungs are now prepared to fill with air. And the brain has nearly its full complement of billions and billions of neurons, reaching out to each other, building connections with mind-boggling speed, nearly 2 million every second, until the brain has become a tightly packed network of trillions of crisscrossing wires, with more connections than stars in the sky.
You can imagine the size of the wiring problem. So how is that problem solved? How is that achieved during development? How is it that each one of those trillion connections is made appropriately?
You might think, oh, what a mess. It's just going to be a jumble of connections and wires all over the place. But in fact, the nervous system seems to have a strategy.
The strategy is in the genes. The brain begins to wire itself by following a precisely specified genetic blueprint.
The connections are following very defined rules. You know, go out of the eye, turn right at the optic chiasm, cross the chiasm, head toward the lateral geniculate nucleus, grow into the lateral geniculate nucleus. Don't grow into the medial geniculate nucleus because that's an auditory structure. So you can imagine the first stage of brain wiring is kind of like solving the problem of connecting phones in New York to phones in Boston. Making sure that you're making connections between Boston and New York and not Boston and Washington, D.C. And that's all specified genetically. Now then there's a second phase of brain wiring. Let's say you want to place a phone call to your grandmother in New York. And you want that phone to ring, you know, on Park Avenue and 47th or whatever. And you don't want the phone to ring up at the Waldorf Astoria. Okay, how do you get that precise phone to ring? That's the second phase of brain wiring. If you place a phone call to your grandmother early in development, her phone will ring. But so will a lot of other phones. So there are a lot of connections that are made. If the connections are correct and being used, they get strengthened. If they're not being used, or they're only being used occasionally, they're lost. We could call it use it or lose it. So the fetal brain is really a dynamic structure that's constantly changing in response to this process of strengthening appropriate connections and pruning inappropriate connections. Getting the circuits all tuned up takes a long time. So it can't happen overnight because you have literally billions of connections to check. When a child is born prematurely, the process is only partly over. So a huge amount of brain wiring is having to happen in the nursery.
At Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, 2-week-old Elizabeth Traphagen, born 3 months premature, must cope with the world before her brain is ready. For more than 2 decades, developmental psychologist Heidelise Ahls has been studying preemies like Elizabeth to learn how their fragile brains, accustomed to the muffled darkness of the womb, adapt to the dazzle and buzz of the world.
How does the difference of inputs, of sound, of light, shape how the brain grows itself? All those cells haven't yet laid down their connective tissue, their telephone wires, if you will, but it's much more active than that. It's like a wire that grows itself. So it's dynamic, it's biological. It's not like the hardware in your computer that you put in, but it depends on what it's experiencing, on the way it grows.
159.
Thanks to the technological wonders of the modern intensive care unit, most premature babies survive.
Came down to 4.75.
But nearly half will have difficulties later in life. Difficulty paying attention, difficulty learning.
They will have trouble with planning, imposing structure, prioritizing. As they grow up, they appear as very bright children, and they are. Yet they can't hold their own in the second grade classroom.